I'm sorry, but I don't want to be an emperor. That's not my business. In this world there's room for everyone, and the good earth is rich and can provide for everyone. The way of life can be free and beautiful, but we have lost the way. Greed has poisoned men's souls, has barricaded the world with hate. We think too much and feel too little. We think too much and feel too little. More than machinery, we need humanity. More than cleverness, we need kindness. Without these qualities, life will be violent, and all will be lost. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die. Dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. Will return to the people. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world, to do away with greed. Now let us fight to free the world, to fulfill that promise. Let us all unite.
Welcome, folks, to the Corporation Nation radio show. I am Clint Richardson, going to fly solo today. And so I was thinking about all of my research I've done over the years, trying to kind of put things into perspective over what we've been talking about with these, well, with the government being run by a bunch of basically private associations. And I thought, today would be a good day to talk about a local issue that's actually a national issue. But in my county, I actually moved right outside of the county because of this, and then later found out that this was a sort of a national and statewide issue. I wrote a little article called "The Sheriff Who Sold His County," which turned out to be sort of a viral thing because people suddenly realized that their law enforcement, the sheriff who's supposed to protect them, actually is a member of not only an international and national association called the Sheriff's Association or National Sheriff's Association, but also that their law enforcement agency that they elected was being dissolved. All the sheriff's departments all over the country being dissolved and placed into what can only be described as a private corporate status, or what's called a special district. Now, we've all heard the memes of what's called the constitutional sheriff, even though the Constitution of the United States does not involve the word sheriff. It's nowhere in the Constitution. So the meme itself is really, well, I suppose if you're talking about a government that is either constitutional or not, we've got to remember that the Constitution was just an outline for what government should be, and basically then the government is then formed like a corporation and creates the laws for that government. So in this way, really all laws are technically constitutional because all the Constitution did was create the government, like a corporate charter. So, to say something is constitutional or not constitutional is simply a tool used in the court system. It doesn't really mean, it doesn't really have that much weight, surprisingly. We covered what the word evil means in the court's opinion, and the word evil turned out to be when a person like myself or any of you actually goes against what government says and says, hey, your laws are tyrannical, or conspires against government. The end of that conspiracy, literally defined as evil, no matter what it was, and it means that you went against government, whether it was acting constitutionally or unconstitutionally. It doesn't matter. Okay? Either way, your actions are evil because you're going against a government that literally claims its power from a higher power. Something we'll discuss in more detail. And, well, we have been discussing it. So let's get to this because we have to understand that all of our government agencies, I should say, are all of our elected and appointed officials are also part of these private associations. Just to give you an example, you've, of course, got the sheriffs, National Sheriffs Association. Now, this organization wishes to have all sheriffs as members because it then promotes a national agenda. The word agenda, of course, being an Agenda 21 type of thing. It wants best practices and it wants model legislation in all states. In other words, it wants a uniform sheriff presence in the United States. The problem with this are the things that it supports. For instance, it supports some of the articles that are on the National Sheriff's Association website are things like in 2009, the National Sheriff's Association supports DWI courts. Well, as we discussed, anytime you have a specific court, that means that you are limiting jurisdiction as opposed to a court of general jurisdiction. You are creating a court in which people voluntarily, even if they don't know they are doing so, voluntarily enter into that court and give up most of their rights before entering. So if you're going to a DWI court, driving under the influence, well, guess what? You are basically going to be at the court's whim. And of course, the Sheriff's Association would support this, whereas a sheriff might not. A sheriff who is a man of good conscience is not part of such a national association with international interests. It also supports funding restoration for national law enforcement and correctional technology centers. Again, our sheriffs aren't really supposed to be there to enforce national laws. They're supposed to actually be protecting us from such things. So for an association to be supporting national things, this gets very dangerous. It means our sheriffs are giving up their local powers by accepting these types of national initiatives and funds. As far as I'm concerned, a sheriff should never, under any circumstances, support anything federal whatsoever, especially funding, because with funding comes requirements. National Sheriff's Association supports biometric identification systems to allow law enforcement to fly while armed. Lots and lots of things here. I could go down a list of many, many things. Supports cybersecurity best practices. Again, best practices being a national implementation of uniform laws. Oh, let's see. It does things that seem good, but in reality are not so good. A National Sheriff's Association supports and encourages the hiring of military veterans in law enforcement positions. Now, of course, these military veterans have been trained to kick in doors of people who are suspected of what? Being Arab? Of being family? It's very good training in the military to do things that are completely what we call, again, unconstitutional or unlawful in this country. So, it goes on and on. If you just go to the front page of the National Sheriff's Association, you'll see some of the things that it supports, and they are not good things. Trust me. For instance, how about this is 2013, it looks like, National Sheriff's Association supports unmanned aircraft systems in support of law enforcement. Now, I would expect my local sheriff to absolutely say no to any and all drones or other quote-unquote unmanned aircraft system. But see, as a member of the National National Sheriff's Association, it is the recommended best practice that sheriffs allow and utilize unmanned drones. So this is sort of just one aspect of the problem with having national associations create what they consider the best practices and standards for operations of sheriffs and other positions. We'll be right back after the break. Stay with us.
Shoe the children with no shoes on their feet. How's the people living in the street? Oh, there's a solution.
into Corporation Nation, and we are talking about the privatization of just about everything in America at this point, and it's being done on the local level, whether that be state, county, or city, or in our case, what we're really talking about are what's called special districts. Special districts are basically the bane of our existence. They are everything that isn't America. In other words, they are a way to create a jurisdiction that is outside of normal legal and lawful realms. Now, you've probably heard of some of them around you. Let's say the sewer district, the water district. Oh, all kinds of districts. You can live in hundreds or thousands of districts. Just depends how big the bureaucracy becomes. And each of those districts is assigned through private function. They're assigned the ability not to tax, because that would require voter approval. But what they are allowed to do by statute and through their little charters, because they are corporations, what these districts are allowed to do is to assign you a fee for a quote-unquote service. This is very important because when you hear the word service, that means that a government is actually able to charge you in a for-profit capacity for any services that you're taking from government. All right, so if we have a district, let me give you an example of my own hometown here. In Draper, Utah, we have what's called the South Valley Sewer District. Now, keep in mind that the sewers were built through taxpayer funding. In other words, it was already paid for before this district. They already existed, in other words, before this district ever came along. So what they did, because they wanted to raise taxes, but instead they resorted to what's called exaction or extortion. All right, so what did they do? They created a district. They drew a little boundary, and they created what's called the South Valley Sewer District. Now, that district, simply because we use the sewers, simply because the sewers are there, they exist, and we crap in them, I suppose, would be a good reason. Well, they decided that every household out there and every apartment must pay a special district fee or a special service fee. So every household has to all of a sudden pay $20. And of course you have the water district, which is another $10. You have the trash district, which is another $10 or $15. Eventually you could have up to thousands in just fees. If you read your power bill, of course, you'll see all kinds of district fees, some districts and things that you've never heard of before. And that's because they don't really advertise these as much as you'd think, because no, they don't really want you to know that these are private enterprises created solely to extort money from you. So, I pay a $20 fee to, well, I shouldn't say I do, but homeowners do, and lessees of apartments do. They pay their $20 fee to the South Valley Sewer District. Now, here's how this works, because again, these districts are assigned certain statutory powers, but they cannot tax you. That is something that requires voter approval, basically. So they create the private associations and they create the districts to get around the laws that bind them from creating new taxes. And that's why most taxes nowadays have nothing to do with voter approval. They work around that. Most things that are built, most decisions made by government have nothing to do with voters or voter approval, because they're all being done in the public-private partnership model through lease agreements with private corporations and associations. So, now what happens when I don't pay my so-called service fee? What exactly happens? Well, this is where the trick comes. This is how they turn an already illegal fee into basically an unlawful tax. So if I don't pay my $20, they will certify this as a debt, and they will send it to the county assessor's office, I believe is what it's called. And from there, they will assess that fee as a tax on your property. tax or some other form of licensing agreement. So if you have a business, let's say you have a business license in the state and you don't pay your fee, it turns into an unlawful tax on your or against your business license or your mortgage. It gets put in the first lien position, and if you don't pay it, then the county or whoever is the assessing agency is can suddenly foreclose on your home because you haven't paid what seemed like an innocent fee, an illegal tax. You see, this is how your government works now. This is why I keep saying over and over, please step out of 1776. It no longer exists. It is but a memory. We now live in a world, in a nation, where we have no representative government whatsoever. We only have the illusion. And as long as we keep falling for the illusion, then we're going to be stuck in it. And that's the thing. Now, what does it mean for the National Association of Sheriffs to support cybersecurity best practices? That's a very interesting concept, and I just released an article on my blog at realityblogger.wordpress.com. The title of it is "The Internet is Being Cast Over America." Now, what's happening here is something called FirstNet. It is a new private internet that is being cast around America. I want to read you just what a quote from actually the First Responder Network Authority Chairman, Sam Ginn, another appointed official, and he's head of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And he's talking about FirstNet. Now, they're using first responders. It's almost as big of a political weapon as children. If you say it's for the children, how can you argue? Well, if you say it's for the paramedics and the firefighters and our police so that they can protect us, well, boy, how can you fight with that? How could you deny them this? Well, here's what it is. According to Sam Ginn, it's a national architecture. It is the largest telecommunications project in the history of the United States. It's going to cover every square meter, in fact, every square inch of land in the United States. It's going to be able to penetrate the basements of Manhattan and cover the forest fires in the Sierra Nevada. All right, so here, what we have here is a taxpayer-funded private internet that is only going to be accessed by government. Now, the way that government operates is incrementally, of course, as we all know. The plan, of course, is to implement something that is it's for the benefit of the people, for first responders to be able to have a nationwide database that, as we discovered earlier, will have biometric capabilities. And, of course, that's to help the people. But what this really is, again, is a private, 100% private internet. It is not accessible by such things as whistleblowers or watchdog groups. Okay? In other words, the government, get this through your heads, folks. The government's going to have its own private internet. Its own private internet, its own private email system, its own private tracking. We're talking about total immersion in tyranny here, folks. Stay with us. We'll get back into the privatization of the sheriffs.
It is like a finger pointing away to the moon. Don't concentrate on the finger or you will miss all that heavenly glory. Empty your mind, be formless, shapeless, like water.
And again, we're talking about the National Sheriff's Association, National Governors Association, National Mayors Association, all of these associations for which your elected and mostly appointed officials are members. This is where they create their legislation. And keep in mind that they're non-governmental corporations or associations. They are non-governmental and they are non-profit, and most importantly, they are non-bias or non-partisan. In other words, when they are meeting and conspiring together in these associations, the Republican and the Democratic moniker goes out the window. It's a meme. It's a false paradigm. It goes away. And all you have left is a organized criminal outfit, who then, of course, as we've discussed, takes their legislation that they create, the model uniform legislation that they want all states and local governments to pass through the Agenda 21 model, to go back and, of course, they lobby themselves to pass their own association's legislation. Now, I'm going to read this again because I just love this. This is Aldous Huxley, Brave New World. It says, a really efficient totalitarian state would be one in which the all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers control the population of slaves who do not have to be coerced because they love their servitude. Now, I don't know about you folks, but I do not love my servitude, and that's why I'm here today, to tell you about this so that you can hopefully do something about it. Let's talk about some other associations, just so we get in the mood here. Government Financial Officers Association label themselves as the thought leader for government accountability professionals. Isn't that interesting? AGM members who number more than 16,000 are local finance directors, state auditors, federal chief financial officers, academians, and private sector leaders. Again, it is a non-governmental association. Another interesting one that you probably aren't familiar with is the National Conference of State Legislatures. This one basically makes a lot of the definitions. For instance, it defines what a public official is, and it turns out that it includes appointed officials as public officials. The National Conference of State Legislatures, from its website, declares itself as a bipartisan, non-governmental organization, or NGO, established in 1975 to serve the members and staff of state legislatures of the United States, states, commonwealths, and territories. It provides research, technical assistance, and opportunities for policymakers to exchange ideas on the most pressing state issues, and is an effective and respected advocate for the interests of the states and the American federal system. Interesting enough, says all state, this is again reading from its website, all state legislatures and staff members are automatically members of the NCSL, or National Conference of State Legislators. All right, so you probably don't know this when you're voting for these people to represent you. You probably don't know that they are automatically, through your vote, being forced into a private association, non-governmental, non-profit, called the National Conference of State Legislatures. I mean, this is ridiculous when you consider what's happening, because it means they're all getting together and literally conspiring to pass legislation without voter approval. This is why the vote itself is so darn important, because you are literally giving these people your legitimacy. You're literally saying, yeah, okay, I'm going to vote for you. I'm going to vote you, Democrat, or I'm going to vote you, Republican, or even I'm going to vote you, Libertarian, or Independent, or Green. And I'm giving you my power. I'm giving it away. So take it, go, conspire, and create international best practices in my local area. Please, thank you. May I have another? I mean, that is what we're doing here. And it's frustrating to know that people don't know that this is happening. How about the National Association of Chief Information officers. This is a great one. NASCIO. I suggest everybody look at this. It says the National Association of Chief Information Officers represents state chief information officers and information technology executives and managers from state governments across the United States. Huh. Well, what else does it do? Let's see. It has a document entitled Advancing the C4 Agenda. Let's see what it says. It says it needs to deal with jurisdictional barriers, governors, and legislatures to deal with governance issues. Now, that's all, of course, referring to board of directors, governance of corporate things. And attorneys general, general counsels, chief acquisition officers, and state budget officers, all of which have private, non-governmental private associations that they are members, to deal with procurement and cost issues. CIOs also identify state agency heads, chief human capital officers. That should disturb you. Human capital officers. In other words, you're a commodity and you have a chief officer that is basically accounting for you, how much tax you're going to pay, how much income you're going to bring in, just like, how much meat and milk will you give as a dairy cow. And industry trade associations, potential leaders for overcoming selected barriers. Now, when it says that, it's saying overcoming the law. That's as simple as that. What is a barrier? A barrier is a jurisdiction. A barrier is a law. It works with the NASPA, which was formed in 1947 in Chicago, a nonprofit association dedicated to strengthening the procurement community, through education, research, and communication. It is made up of the directors of the central purchasing offices in each 50 states, District of Columbia, and the territories of the United States. It's an organization through which the member purchasing officials provide leadership and professional public procurement. It's talking about privatization here, folks. Improve the quality of procurement, exchange information, and cooperate to attain greater efficiency, economy, and customer satisfaction. Now, this is an important point, too, because government doesn't refer to you as people anymore. It refers to you as customers. Because government, if you look at their financial statements, their CAFRs, Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, you'll see that it has both governmental and non-governmental funds and functions. Okay, it has enterprise operations. An enterprise is a corporation for profit. Of course, it takes its profits and buries them in funds, investment funds, so that it appears that it makes no profit. And then, of course, it benefits from the returns on those investments, loans it out through corporate bonds and other such federally approved financial instruments. This is what's happening. It's so frustrating. NASPO, in collaboration with the National Institute of Governmental Purchasing, the Universal Public Procurement Certification Council, formed that to encourage and award Certified Public Procurement Officer designation and Certified Professional Public Buyer designation. So, geez, I mean, I could go on and 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 on with all these different associations. But let's hear what the National Association of County Information Officers actually does. And this should floor you. The website says it tells us the top 10 reasons, and this is nacio.org. It's a list of the top 10 reasons why every county should have a propaganda system, that's their words, in place by hiring a public information officer, or PIO. So, literally, a public propaganda or information officer. Every county should have one to deal with bozos like me who make public inquiries. It says, quote, "Don't leave it up to the traditional media to determine what is news. A good public information officer can not only influence media coverage, but can also help generate positive publicity using a county's internal media outlet outlets, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, websites, etc. Public information officer, public propaganda officer. We'll be back.
And the men who hold high places must be the ones who start to mold a new reality closer to the heart, closer to the heart.
All right, welcome back, folks. An all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers to control a population of slaves. That's a very, very apropos statement to what we are talking about today. Again, the National Association of County Information Officers. This is by far my favorite private association in the world. This is wonderful. Listen to this. Again, a public information officer. Why should every city and county have a public information officer? Why should every county and city have a propaganda minister? Well, let's again read the top four. There's 10 reasons, but I'm going to read you the top 4 reasons. So we don't forget the first one. It says, don't leave it up to the traditional media to determine what is news. A good PIO, or public information officer, can not only influence media coverage, but can also help generate positive publicity for your corporation, or in other words, municipal corporation, government, using a county's internal media outlets. Don't go to the government website. Instead, go to Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. Well, I guess, or your website. We can fix that too, so that that has the same social media look as Facebook, maybe. Outsourcing, number 2, outsourcing PR, and this is straight from their website. Outsourcing PR, or public relations, and marketing duties is far more expensive and less cohesive. So why would you hire out a PR officer when you could just hire one yourself, a good public information officer? It says branding and marketing are synergized and more effective when using your own staff. Your own PR staff, public relations staff, understands your organization better and is more loyal and committed to it. Okay, folks, now this should be very disturbing language. Okay, first of all, public relations. Okay, you're talking about a public or supposedly public entity that is going to do branding and marketing. Do you know why government needs branding and marketing? Because it doesn't want you to know that an all-powerful executive of political bosses that are appointed and their army of appointed managers control the population. That's why you need branding and marketing of the privatization of government. And that's why every good county needs a good PIO, or public information officer. Number 3, from the National Association of County Information Officers, or NACIO, NACIO.org. A PIO, or public information officer, can get out good, positive news. Let me start over. A public information officer can get out good, positive news about what's going on in your county to help to balance the times where there is a negative story. If people only see the negative, they think that's all the county is about. So a good public information officer obviously can focus on the positive in government and just kind of make people forget about the negatives, because we want to be in a positive thinking society. That's very Agenda 21 if you think about it. As long as there's happy thoughts, the negative stories about government could just go by the wayside, and that's why you need a good propaganda minister called a public information officer. You might want to check your own counties to see who your public information officer is and see how they're covering up the negative stories about your government. Number 4, a public information officer can provide training and guidance for elected officials and management staff on working with the media, especially during a crisis or potentially damaging story. A damaging story? You know what that means, right? That means the government is breaking the law. They're doing things to harm you. so we can cover it up. If we just train our all-powerful executive of political bosses and their army of managers, if we just train them to deal with the media and always put a positive spin, then we can possibly avoid potentially damaging stories from getting out in the news so that we have an informed public about how corrupt government is. Or, here's a thought. Why don't we just have honesty and transparency with everything, and then there'd be no need for a propaganda minister? I don't know. It's just a crazy thought. I'm sorry. I'm a terrorist for saying that. Honesty is terrorism, isn't it? So, look, folks. I mean, I don't know how to put this any better than reading from their official documents here. You don't have a representative government. You have a government that needs a propaganda minister to convince you that government is good, that you can ignore the negative aspects of government. I mean, how can we put this any other way? Let me read something to you here. Just because we get confused about what our rights are and what a right is, for that matter, which is it's a shame that we don't really understand what that word means and that rights are actually forced upon us. Let's see if I can find this here. I use it quite often. It's actually in the U.S. Code, and it is Title 42, Section 1981. I might have to get back to that because I don't have it open in front of me. But it basically says that you have the right to be extorted from, and they use the word exaction. When we look that up in a legal dictionary, of course, it refers to the word extortion, and is defined as, exaction is actually defined as something or a fee or charge that a tax that is not due, charged to you by an officer. Okay, so it is your right to be put in pain, punished, taxed, and extorted from. That is your right. And you have to understand that that is what equal rights are. All people, this is a statement of equal rights, and all people must fall under the equal protection of the law. What does that mean, protection of the law? It means protection of government. It means you must pay your fee. It means you must suffer extortion, exaction. You must give something that is not due to officers of the law and of government. Doesn't matter if they're not elected. And anybody that complains, of course, will be subsequently smushed by the Public Information Office, and only the positive side. So let's get back to this sheriff thing, because this is probably one of the most important things I've ever uncovered, and I certainly tried to fight it in my own county and failed miserably, because our sheriff is a guy named Jim Winder. Now, Winder has about 10 generations in Utah that have been councilmen and other political offices. So he didn't earn his sheriff's badge. He got there by popularity and the power of his family. Interestingly, I worked on a farm there for a while that lost their business and had to close up because the Winders, through political tyranny, no doubt, basically closed them down, outbidded their Costco contract. So we're talking about not only corruption in government through the family units, but also a family that's very high order in the Mormon, what we call the Mormon Mafia, I suppose, the Mormon Church that also governs the state of Utah, essentially. So we have a very bad situation, especially in this state. And again, I tried. I interviewed the sheriff. I interviewed the mayor on the local radio station. To my surprise, the sheriff was actually kind of frightening. He actually scared me. He was so belligerent, and I can only use the word evil honestly. Not someone I want to be my sheriff, definitely. So what happened here in Utah, here in Salt Lake County, is that, I'll just read what happened. We created something called the Unified Police Department, or UPD. It became the new Sheriff's Department. They actually dissolved the Sheriff's Department. It says, as of January 1st, 2010, the County Sheriff's Department was officially dissolved. In its place was put a new corporation, or what they call a special district, called the Unified Police Department, or district. All right, folks, we'll continue to take some calls in the next segment.
Soldiers, don't give yourselves to brutes. Men who despise you, enslave you, tell you what to do, what to think, and what to feel. Who drill you, diet you, treat you like cattle. Don't give yourselves to these unnatural men. Machine men with machine minds and machine hearts. You are not machines, you are men. You, the people, have the power to make this life free and beautiful. Choose the power to make this life a wonderful adventure. Let us all unite. Let us fight for a new world to do away with greed. A world where science and progress will lead to all men's happiness. Do not despair. The hate of men will pass and dictators die. And the power they took from the people will return to the people. Let us all unite.
All right, folks, welcome back to Hour 2 of the Corporation Nation. We'll take some calls, probably in the next segment here. And just want to do an overview. You can find this article that I wrote some time ago. It's called The Sheriff Who Sold His County. I also did a video on the blog that was called Special Districts and how they work. But I wanted to read. This is from the local Fox 13 affiliate that was reporting on this going on. So here's what happened with the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. The details, quote, the details of a new Metro Police force for Salt Lake County, a feat that has taken several years to accomplish, have now been finalized. As of January 1st, 2010, the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office will be dissolved and will be replaced with a new Metro Police Department. Okay, notice they're saying police and not sheriff. These are, in fact, police officers. The once deputized sheriffs lost their deputization and are now simply police officers. In fact, we talked to some of them personally, and they were very upset because they didn't want to be municipal police. They wanted to be in the sheriff's office. But that department was closed, dissolved, replaced with a new Metro Police Department. The new department will be run by mayors of participating cities. It's happened, quote, it's happened. Today we are formalizing what has really been a several-year initiative to create a consolidated police entity that is managed by municipal corporation mayors. That was our sheriff, Sheriff Winder, of the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Office. Goes on to say that instead of being run by a chief or by the sheriff, the Metro Police Force will be controlled by a board made up of the mayors of the participating municipalities or corporations. The sheriff will act as the chief executive officer on that board. Okay, do you understand what happened here? Basically, the sheriff's department got dissolved. And this is happening all over the country, not just in Utah. All over the country, all of the counties within Utah are also suffering the same fate incrementally. It's happening. The mayor's report also was published in 2009. So this is 2009, October. This is straight from the mayor's office. The Unified Police Department will be born January 1st, 2010. The 250,000 residents of Salt Lake Valley will be served by the new police force. So, it goes on to say the UPD, or Unified Police Department, will replace the Salt Lake County Sheriff's Patrol Services. Mayors of the member cities, municipal corporations, will join representatives from the unincorporated county as the UPD's board of directors, setting policy and budget. The sheriff will the sheriff will be the chief operating officer, or CEO, COO, and run day-to-day police operations. Goes on to say this transformation has been a long time coming. Former Sheriff Aaron Kennard joined Sheriff Jim Winder last month before the Salt Lake County Council to report that groundwork for the Unified Police Department started more than a decade and a half ago, so 15 years in the making, secretly plotting to get rid of Sheriff Department and create a private corporation instead. What's called a district, of course. It's a district. It means it gets to do things that wouldn't be possible if it were part of the sheriff's department, under the sheriff. Instead, they gave the sheriff two hats. They split him down the middle, and they said, okay, you're still the elected sheriff. You still will deal with that sort of things, and you will still keep a small staff which only houses the courts and the prisons. Okay, when you go to court, you see the sheriff's officer there, and he's still part of the sheriff. But all those deputies basically got fired and rehired as police officers, municipal police. The county is also a municipal corporation. Okay, so our sheriff's department was dissolved. Do you understand how serious this is, and that this is happening across the nation? There's even efforts in states like Massachusetts to get rid of counties altogether. You want to get rid of the power and beauty of having a lawful and honorable man as sheriff that would oppose the tyrannies of a central government. Well, guess what? All you really have to do is get rid of counties. They're just a bureaucracy, right? Well, that's how Massachusetts is forming now. They got rid of their counties. It means they got rid of their individual CAFRs. It's much easier to rule the state without counties. Now you just have municipal corporations and the state. Very, very interesting. One major difference is that municipalities will become full partners and part owners of equipment traditionally owned by the county. So they didn't just sell the sheriff's office, they sold the equipment as well. Again, right from the mayor's website. It also talks about the fire department becoming unified, and what this does is it drops borders, it ignores borders, it creates a multi-jurisdictional aspect to firefighters and to police. Now, it's important to note here that there was a case that was reported in the Huffington Post. Wonder if I can find that on here. I'm pretty sure I put it on here, but it's a case where there was a guy. His house was burning. It was in Tennessee, I believe, and he called the Unified Fire Department, not even considering that what could happen did happen. He called the Unified Police Department because it had already happened there. I believe it was Tennessee, and the fire department comes out. They quickly get on their computers, make a call, and they discover that this gentleman, being a good honorable man, decided that he didn't want to be exacted from, and pay what's called a fire protection fee, a $75 fee, I believe it was, that was charged to all residents, all homeowners, and if you didn't pay it, as we discussed, it'll be transferred over to the county assessor's office, and it will be attached to your property tax, and you'll be foreclosed on if you don't pay your property tax, basically. So, what happened? Well, the fire department sat there and watched the house burn, simply because this man did not pay a $75 fee to the extortion racket that created a private district, a private corporation that all of the firefighters then went into. It went from being a public entity to basically a private entity. And if you don't pay the protection fee, and this goes for police as well, guess what? You're not going to get service. Because remember, we're talking about a for-profit service here. Therefore, you must pay a fee for that service. The Unified Fire Department, I'm pretty sure it was Tennessee, was no longer operating by necessity, but instead in a for-profit function or a private function. No one, I mean, if you see a fire, you put it out. Period, end of story. But not if you have a unified private district that becomes your service-oriented government. We'll be back.
Neighbor, welcome again to this neighborhood. I'd like to show you something. You know what this is? Maybe if I press this button. There are so many things to learn about in this world, and so many people who can help us learn, and so many people who can help us learn. Did you ever grow anything in the garden of your mind?
All right, folks, welcome back.
You can grow ideas.
You grow ideas in the garden of your mind. It's good to be curious. You should really be curious about this, because what we're talking about is basically setting up a special district called a Fire and Police Protection District that transfers all of the police functions of the sheriff into a private organization that is then managed by mayors of the city. So imagine, what's the best case scenario for a bunch of mayors who are basically your mob bosses running the organized crime? Well, the best option would be to have your very own police force that once was a lawful organization and is now a private functioning police force for the mayors who sit as the board, with the sheriff being the CEO of the corporation. So he takes off his sheriff hat as the lawfully elected sheriff, and he instead becomes the CEO, the chief operating officer as well, of the private corporation or private association, the special district called Unified Police District or Department. So in this capacity, he's no longer acting as sheriff. He has now two functions, one private, one public. This is a very, very serious thing. I want to read you one more thing, then we'll get to Larkin, Texas. This is a private non-governmental Florida company describing what a special tax district is. Now, keep in mind that what they did here was they didn't just create the Unified Police District. They created a special financing district, which, just like the example we used earlier with the South Valley Sewer District, charges a fee for quote-unquote police protection. It's actually called a police protection fee. Now, if that doesn't remind you of gangland-style protection money, I don't know what will. But here's what it says and how it describes what a special district is. Now, Special District Services Incorporated creates and manages special taxing districts, again, a private non-governmental corporation, throughout the state of Florida. SDS was organized to meet the growing demand for urban services and provide a public financing vehicle to serve community infrastructure and service needs in a timely and cost-effective manner. SDS is a results-oriented company with the philosophy that a public-private partnership is an essential ingredient for the successful delivery of public infrastructure through the use of special districts. All right, folks, let me explain what happened here. Now, we have a company here in California that actually administers the Salt Lake Valley Law Enforcement Service Area, which is the function that collects money, the private police protection fee. And all the purpose of this thing is simply to extort money through this police protection fee. All right? So, here is one of the letters that it sent to a friend of mine who forwarded me actually all of the letters. This was one of the final letters that he received. It says, and this is written by the private company in California, not by the mayors. It says, 2010 police fee statement, billing cycle number 3. It says amounts delinquent from prior installment periods, including late penalties, have been reported to the Salt Lake County as delinquent. Such delinquent amounts totaling $127.60 will be included on your 2010 property tax bill. Now remember, this was an innocent fee. What happens when you don't pay the fee, a completely unlawful thing, extortion extreme, it then gets transferred into the lawful aspect of being a tax on your property. And what happens when you don't pay your property tax? I think we know. Okay, so this is organized crime extraordinaire, all run through the public-private partnership model through NBS, a private corporation in California. That's for Utah. Now, there's hundreds and hundreds of corporations like this that all specialize across the country in this PPP model to basically, extort from you by creating a fee, a police and fire protection fee. All right, let's take Lark in Texas. Lark, you there, my friend?
Well, how are you, Clint? I got to tell you, all I can say is, wow, I'm so glad you're bringing this information forward because it's very important.
Extremely.
It kind of gives new meaning to that line, my hands are tied, doesn't it?
Well, there was a great, I think Jan Irvin was talking about it, where they like to play stupid. It's actually a model strategy that they use to say, hey, my hands are tied, it's the law. We're stupid, we don't know what's going on, when of course they do. So yeah, it's it's a way to personally tie your own hands in government. Look, this is not coming from me, sir. This is coming from the national, model legislations. This is not just my decision. This is the opinion of all state legislators and all governors and all sheriffs. I mean, this is the way of the world now, and it's, my hands are tied. You're absolutely right.
I'll tell you a little interesting story. A few years ago, I ran across this word, syndicalism. And I looked it up there in Wikipedia, and it said, it just defined it as a trade union or a professional trade association. So I started saying this word out loud because I hadn't heard anybody say it too much. And so within a few weeks, I noticed that the professional trade association aspect was removed from the Wikipedia entry so that it highlighted the international workers of the world, which was the most famous example of a so-called syndicalist trade organization or trade association in the United States. But it's interesting that this word goes all the way back to the word syndics, and especially the syndics of the Drapers Guild, which is the picture you see on a Dutch Master's cigar box that is a replica of a Rembrandt painting by the same name. And the most famous syndicalist that I was able to uncover that most people have never heard of is this gentleman by the name of Anthony Judge, Judge, just like it sounds, and you can look his name up. But I wonder if you mentioned the U.S. Conference of Mayors.
No, that's certainly one of them. I couldn't remember the name of it, but now that you say that, it's the Conference of Mayors, where all the mayors get together and lobby themselves again. It's the same with every department. I mean, there is no there's no one immune to this. They're all basically thrown into this. So it's
yeah, its current leader is the mayor of Los Angeles, Antonio Villaraigosa. And he was the guy that, through his office, organized these street demonstrations not so long ago with La Raza Unida and Azafan. And it was
Sure.
shocking to see all the red, people wearing red, plastered all over the streets with actual communist banners and slogans, workers of the world unite, the fist in the air, and all this kind of stuff. I was certainly shocked, but I tell you what really struck me is the funding arm of the GOP is called the Republican National Committee. Now, this is a syndicalist trade association.
Absolutely.
And they are proud members of, get this, the International Democratic Union, or IDU.org.
Mm-hmm.
They are devoted to world socialism.
Absolutely. Well, we have to remember that the Republican and Democratic parties are nothing but non-governmental private associations, just like anything else out there. We'll be back. Stay on the line, Larry.
Wake up and look around you. We're lost in space and the earth is your home.
Hi, neighbor.
Back.
Welcome again
You
to
are
this
in the
neighborhood.
Corporation Nation. And with me on the line is Lark from Texas. And we also have Fred in Michigan we'll get to in a minute. Yeah, Lark, I mean, this is the confusing aspect to me, is why people join the Republican Democratic parties, because they're non-governmental, first of all. They are private in function, which is why they can exclude the voting process, and they can do their straw polls and then just completely ignore the straw poll. They can do all kinds of things because they are private. They don't need the base, the political base that joins the party. They don't care what the people think because they're a private association, non-governmental. And I still to this day do not understand why people can't get that across to themselves, that they're participating in a fraud, which is why they have such an enormous fraud as their representatives in government.
Well, you know, you're singing to the choir. I got to tell you, I used to be quite the political neophyte. I live in Dallas, Texas, of course, and I can tell you that I found out things about the sheriffs, the police, the former mayor, who was President Obama's trade representative until he was replaced earlier this year. The corrupt, institutionalized, and quite widespread, and you say it perfectly when you call it racketeering. I call it simply organized crime writ large, or gangsterism. It is endemic throughout the society. But it's interesting to note that, Clint, that, you know, Giuseppe Mazzini, who was a famous correspondent of Albert Pike's once upon a time, he is said to be the founder of the Italian Mafia, although that's doubtful. But he said, famously, we aspire to corrupt in order to rule. And I think that really is the operating watchword for how governance, or government, what we used to call government, operates today. What I discovered about the sheriffs, for instance, this is throughout the country, is they took that government money back in the early to mid-'90s, and there's not a one of them that's not tied to some kind of a government contract, which essentially forced them to rewrite their mission statements and their policies and procedures manuals.
Sure.
And so these people that we call elected officials, more often than not, are really not independent actors at all, because, as you've pointed out so well tonight, I mean, these people really do have tied hands. Their hands are tied. Why? Because they've associated with stuff with all these crooks.
Literally, the word associated is very important. I mean, let's remind the audience that the definition of a bureaucrat is simply an official who works by fixed routine without exercising intelligent judgment. In other words, you know, if you're a member of an association, the aspect of passing a law is a secondary function for you as a legislature. You're not really there to deliberate on the law so much as you are to accept the law that you've written in your association, along with corporations and ALEC and all these other, you know, American Legislative Exchange Council and all that. You're there to just basically again, be a bureaucrat by fixed routine, go ahead and exercise absolutely no intelligent judgment and just put your rubber stamp that says, I vote for this bill, because really, it was already voted on when it was created in the private association. They're acting nonpartisanly. Again, the political parties are just a function of dividing the people, basically, and making the people actually think that our politicians are also divided, that there's two sides at least to the argument, and there isn't. That's the real point. And it's a shame, really, because we are watching the dismantling of, I don't care about the United States. I got to be honest with you. The United States can go. It's in my book, it is the most treasonous, horrible killing machine I've ever seen. So, okay, that thing can go. But what we're seeing is on a local and statewide level, we're seeing the states being dismantled. We're seeing the republics being covered and smeared in nothing but bureaucracy and private law coming from private association. That's the real problem. Okay, so again, all the problems stem federally. The way they're being implemented locally is what we should be concerned with, and that is really the only thing we can fight, because we don't have standing with the Constitution and the courts. We can only do things locally. That's the God honest truth. We don't vote for president, we do vote for president, but we don't elect him. We have no real power federally, which is, in my opinion, why we should stop participating in it, because it rules us without our participation, without our function. And this, of course, is controlled through the public, the private associations called Democrat and Republican parties, and then, of course, there's Libertarian and all that. But we have to remember the model of this is to have a national organization called the Republican or the Democratic Party, and then on the state and local level to have the national policies of that private association be funneled down to the very smallest local level. This is no different than any other association, from your sheriffs to your mayors to your governors. That is the UN model, the United Nations model, for all the nations to meet together in their private association called the United Nations, then to go back to their collective nations, which are called states of the United Nations, and then to pass uniform laws in every nation. It's no different. It's the same model. And then that gets funneled down to the local level. So, I mean, that's in a nutshell the government, Lark.
You're right. And then when you look at these syndicalist organizations, whether they're blue-collar or white-collar, and then we look to the people that we look to when we get in trouble in our society, people like, for example, doctors and attorneys. They also are members of syndicalist organizations, the American Medical Association, the American Bar Association, the National Lawyers Guilds. They run roughshod over everyone, and all of these people are not independent actors. They're basically tied to their trade associations and their rules and so forth and so on. I remember as a kid I worked as a copy boy at a big city newspaper, and they had such a thing as the Society of Newspaper Editors and Publishers. And what this did was enforce or force conformity upon the public opinion as expressed in the nation's newspapers. And so this just gives us an idea. This is an important word to consider, this word syndicalism, because this is precisely what you're describing tonight. As well as when you talked about the public information officer, I couldn't help but look up, revisit the words of Ivy Ledbetter Lee and also Edward Bernays, who famously called for a scientific technique of opinion molding for the engineering of consent, which Noam Chomsky wrote about in Manufacturing Consent.
Right.
Even Walter Cronkite, who was a member of the World Federalist Society, which is a syndicalist group, he said famously, "Our task is not to tell the truth. We are opinion molders." So that's what I have for you tonight, Clint. I appreciate very much your efforts on RBN, by the way, and thanks for taking my call.
Hey, man, if you want to stay on, you can. I like what you have to say. I'll just bring my next caller on with you here if you want.
Well, cool. I'll just hang out then.
All right. Fred in Michigan, you're on with myself and Lark.
Great company. It sounds like, John Houseman, the paper chase, sounds like everything is contract. And since we pay their salary, that has to constitute a contract. The money they extort from us as tax revenues, that's a contract. And then, of course, the investments they garnered from the revenues on those revenues they invest, as you revealed in the CAFR along with Walter Burrian. That has to constitute a contract. Everything, aren't all the funds in government trust funds and thereby, predicated upon contract law, which means full disclosure and good faith, valuable consideration, clean hands. The four principal tenets.
Yeah, I think the confusion though stems from the thought that consent has to be an openly created thing. In other words, everybody really has to know what's going on. And you'll read Supreme Court opinions quite often that say, look, it is the duty of the U.S. citizen to know the law. Okay, I mean, yeah, imagine a typical. Well, imagine anyone in the world, aside from the most severe autistic child, being able to memorize U.S. code. It's impossible. So here's what I want to. Again, this was what I was reading from earlier. Is Title 42 U.S. Code 1981. This says it all to me. It's equal rights under the law. The Statement of Equal Rights. All persons within the jurisdiction of the United States shall be subject to like punishment, pains, penalties, taxes, licenses, and extortion of every kind and no other. Okay, that is it, right there. That is the law. It says that you shall be subject to exaction, which is extortion, taxes, penalties.
Did you see the frightened ones? Did you hear the falling bombs? Did you ever wonder why we had to run for shelter when the promise of a brave new world unfurled beneath the clear blue sky?
All right, folks, welcome back. Final segment of the Corporation Nation Radio for Monday. Oh, gosh, I forgot the date. Darn it. October something. National Sheriff's Association supports the establishment of regulations regarding the use of shackles on pregnant inmates. National Sheriff Association supports the Regional Information Sharing Systems, or RISS. National Sheriff's Association urges Congress to take steps to preserve law enforcement's ability to lawfully intercept electronic communications, regardless of the communications technology involved, and to ensure that reforms to the Electronic Communications Privacy Act do not result in added delays to lawfully authorize law enforcement investigations. National Sheriff's Association supports the goals and mission of the Terrorist Screening Center. All right, folks. This is the importance of turning your sheriff's department into a private district, basically, a private corporation, and making the sheriff the CEO so that he's not actually acting in a lawful capacity. He's acting in a private function to provide a service to the people. That's the importance. That way, the National Sheriff's Association's ridiculous opinions can be implemented where otherwise they would be unlawful, you see. Meanwhile, the sheriff can pretend to be the elected sheriff and still deal with the things he's required to do without a sheriff's department, but instead of private police force. All right. Fred, please continue.
Well, speaking of Agenda 21, Michael Shaw, freedomadvocates.org, has repeatedly stated that these local ICLEI arrangements or agreements are international by nature, international contracts, which violates the federal charter. in the acting as they are, whether it's the sheriff or the National Association of County Information Officers, whenever they fail to do what we tell them to do or what's in our best interest, that's breach of contract. As I see it, even, this fellow, I don't know if you interviewed Brandon Turpaville, but I did go to activistpost.com where Brandon Turpaville has his stellar intel reports, and I then discovered a really brilliant woman by the name of Susan Boskey, B as in Betty, O-S-K-E-Y, Susan Boskey. She has 11 factoids, secret factoids about the original and first Constitution being the Articles of Confederation and Perpetual Union. Yeah, so the present federal charter of 1788, when it was ratified by 9 instead of the 13 original sovereign independent state republics, as it was required by the Articles of Confederation, nor did they even report. So this would have been Washington, James Madison, Ben Franklin, whom I consider to be, satanic, Talmudic. I may be wrong, but they are satanic, and they are internationalist conspirators. So what they did is they went ahead and fabricated the Federalist Papers, all 85. None of them were signed by its authors, just Publius. Then they engaged in their public relations PR PSYOPs disinfo program, and whereby they duped the colonial populace that were dupable into supporting it. And they even went so far, and you can read this at her post, Susan Boskey at activistpost.com. I think it's the 7th factoid. And they even went so far, Madison, Washington went so far as to say that we have nothing to do with the original Confederation. And yet they were authorized only to revise and report to the Confederate Congress and all 13 of the state legislatures, and they didn't do that. And they got only 9, and they were required to get 13.
The Constitution also, it mentions in there that it mentions admiralty law. I mean, it didn't create anything sovereign, because you can't really have sovereignty with admiralty law being your main function of law. What it created was private law.
Yeah.
And, this Title 42, 1981 I'm talking about, I suggest everybody read it, because it also tells you that you have the right to make and enforce contracts, to be sued, be parties, and give evidence, and all that, all the equal benefit of all laws. And when it defines that, it says make and enforce contracts. For purposes of this section, the term make and enforce contracts includes the making, performance, modification, and termination of contracts. But more importantly, the enjoyment of all benefits, privileges, terms, and conditions of the contractual relationship. Now, this, of course, has to do with the United States. Enjoyment, unfortunately, is a very misleading word, because it's forced. The terms of the conditions of the contract are forced upon you. And then the last part is that the protection against impairment. Of course, again, the word protection means that you're forced into the contractual relationship. The rights protected by this section are protected against impairment by non-governmental discrimination and impairment under color of state law. So it took away the state's ability to protect you and made you a federal contractee. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, this is all based on contract. It's all based on a voluntary contract, even if we don't know we're volunteering for it. So I agree. Lark, did you have anything else to say?
All that constitutes, Clint, is what I call coercion-induced constructive or secret trust, adhesion contract, implied consent liability.
Yeah, but you know what? That's your right.
And the point is, I brought up UCC 1308 last week, and the remaining part of that, which I don't have before me, it talks about being placed under that venue and jurisdiction of a international bankruptcy or commercial agreement without my informed consent. No, there is, like Article 14th Amendment, Section 4, the validity of the public debt. Well, the public debt is contractual, and they're saying that the validity cannot be questioned. All right, well, fine, but the point is, there's either a valid contract or no contract, right? Validity is crucial. Is it valid? And if it's not, there's no contract. And in the case of whether it's property taxes, where it's obviously a deliberately coerced, compelled performance, forced compliance contract, unless it was done according to the legally binding precepts of contracts, like John Houseman used to say in, paper chase, everything's contract. Well, fine. Full disclosure in good faith, valuable consideration, clean. There aren't any valid contracts between us and government for those reasons. And
it basically boils down to the fact that, and I will say this over and over, as long as you are accepting the benefits of government, all court opinions are the same. It says very clearly that as long as you're accepting benefits, you will also accept and enjoy all the terms and conditions and everything else that goes along with that. That is the real problem, because we're addicted like a drug to the benefits that are coming from the federal government. We don't want to give those up to be free. We want to keep those. And in that regard, unfortunately, it means that we are subject to everything else. And that's, that's the voluntary aspect of it.
Yeah, you're right. But the point is,
yes,
if people would stop to consider, hey, wait, I don't have any kids in the school system. Why should I pay for schools that are flunky mills anyway? I mean, people have to get down to the very basics, which is their pocketbook, if you will, even though it's not real money. Okay, and speaking of that, Clint, I wish you would interview Karen Hudes sometimes. KAHUDES.net, because she says, and the other one is, before I forget, pandaunite.org. You go to pandaunite.org/takeback. Albany, New York, and several cities out east have already been, constitutionally restored or whatever. I haven't been able to get into the site, but I heard the interview last week.
Well, I'll do my best. Maybe you could send me their contact information. Lark, sorry we didn't get to you again, but thanks for holding on, and Fred for the call. Join me tomorrow.